I'm Larry Fedoruk, and welcome to a new episode of my podcast. I Was 8, a weekly series, childhood stories from that remarkable year growing up on the Great Canadian Prairie. Timelines curve and intersect a little. Some of the names had to be changed, but these stories mostly happened as told. I was 8.
Chapter 12, Caswell Wagner.
One of my best friends growing up was Caswell Wagner, who had the misfortune of being named Caswell, but in later years ended up with one of the cooler nicknames in our town, Kaz. There were a couple of older kids, as I recall, that were kind of in charge of nicknames in town. Once they called you something, that was it. That was your name. Mine? Well, I'm Fedoruk, so you can only imagine the creative aliases. Larry the Dork, Fedorknob, Fedorfa, F-Bomb, Larry Feed Store, which somehow became Larry Footsore, which later turned into Foot Stink. Oh, gosh, I hated those kids in charge of nicknames. Mercifully, by high school, it had kind of morphed into Footsie, a nickname of a nickname, and most of the kids forgot the origin of the moniker. Not me. I mean, I never had a foot odor problem. It came from Feed Store. So I took grief most of my school life. Caswell only took grief until he became Kaz, the cool nickname. Plus, it was discovered that Kaz could run really fast, and he could always catch a football. All you had to do was throw it anywhere in his general vicinity, and he would catch it. That, too, upped his cool factor. However, in the earlier years, Caswell and I, a teacher's kid, found some bond in both being outcasts. He for his first name, and me for what my mother did for a living. Sure, we played cowboys and war and softball with the other kids sometimes, but we also hung out a lot together, just the two of us. Now, Caswell Wagner also had this other unique piece of story attached to him. He was the only kid in town who was adopted. What's adopted mean, Mom? Well, that's when a boy's real parents can't take care of him, so other parents adopt the boy and raise him as their own. By the way, Caswell doesn't know he's adopted, so don't say anything to him, ever. Why my parents trusted me with this nugget of information is puzzling now that I remember it. I suppose it was because Kaz and I were friends, and because my parents drilled into me to always try and imagine what other people's feelings might be, and act accordingly. I guess they thought I could be counted on to keep a secret. Believe me, I think I know where your thoughts are going next, because even at 8, that's where my thoughts went. If Kaz is adopted but his parents didn't tell him, who's to say I'm not adopted? Or Debbie, or Joanne, or Mike, or that idiot Philip, or Linda, or my whole class? Well, of course, I had to ask. My folks said no, I was not adopted. But now, could they be trusted? I'm sure Kaz's parents told him the same thing mine told me. Kaz's parents seemed very nice, but obviously they were liars. It was disheartening. And frightening, too. 8 years old, and my entire existence is being called into question. Who was I, really? I kept the secret. Kaz and I continued as buddies. My favorite thing on a Saturday was to go to Kaz's house. Just down the street, up the back lane, 2 houses in, knock on the back door. We had a nice house with everything we needed, but Kaz had a much nicer house. It was much newer, like one of those TV houses, and everything inside seemed new. Even though Kaz had an older sister and a younger brother, Kaz had his own room. And in their basement, wow, a whole other house with real walls and carpeting and couches, a ping pong table, and another TV. A second TV. Wow, luxurious. When you opened the cupboard door down there were shelves packed with Monopoly and Clue and Parcheesi. It was all so wonderful. Why would anyone ever leave this house for any reason? You wouldn't. Kaz and I hung out a lot in that underworld, but occasionally we would get a game of Monopoly going with his brother and sister at the kitchen table. Get this, they had a place to sit and eat near the kitchen, but they also had a separate dining room. Oh, this house was overwhelming. The dining room was next to the living room, which Kaz and I could sit in, but we couldn't play in there. Sometimes his older sister would practice the organ in the living room. Yeah, they had an organ. And Mrs. Wagner would make us sit there and listen to the live organ recital. Afterward, if we were good, we got snacks. Each time I was over, I would catch myself staring at Kaz. Or he would catch me staring. What are you looking at? Oh, nothing. Nothing. Not looking at you being adopted? Not at all. No, no. I kept the secret. Of course, I was looking at him being adopted and wondering what that was like. His life seemed perfectly fabulous, except for the organ music. I would go back home and pepper my parents with questions. When was he adopted? How does he not remember? Where are his real parents? Are they alive? What if they show up one day? Do his brother and sister know? Will he ever know? And so forth. I got no real satisfactory answers because, again, my parents now, could they be trusted to tell the truth? Months later, at a family gathering, one of my uncles commented how much I looked like my father, and another uncle disagreed. I was the spitting image of my mother's father as a young lad. This discussion went on for a bit. I stood there, posing, turning to the right, turning to the left. At one point, they made me wear my grandfather's hat as evidence. I didn't think I looked like anybody, except for myself. This just made me stare at Kaz and his family all the more. His mother, father, sister, and brother were all fair-haired, almost blonde, blue-gray eyes, all on the plump side. Kaz was thin and bony, with a crop of wavy, unruly black hair and dark, sunken eyes. Surely that would have been a clue for him, too, but then again, I didn't think I looked like my family, so why would he notice the discrepancy in his family? Again, perhaps I was adopted also. I was becoming more suspicious of it. Then again, I was 8. I lived in a house. I had my own room, a bicycle, a ball glove, food, occasionally some treats and snacks. Life was good. So, did it really matter? Still, why the lies? When I say I kept the secret, I kept the secret. I never revealed the secret to Kaz. But this one time at recess, I was sitting talking to this girl named Mildred. We called her Mildew. She mentioned something about Kaz. So I said, I have a secret about Kaz, but I can never, ever, ever, never tell anyone. She blurted out, "Oh, you mean that Kaz is adopted?" I was stunned into silence. "Oh, everyone knows that," she said. "You're not supposed to say anything to Kaz." All right. Mind blown. You mean the whole town knows? Every kid and every adult in the entire town of 1,000 people, not to mention the neighboring farms and villages, except for Kaz, knows that he's adopted? The whole town is lying? First and foremost, that's a sin. Later, I confronted my parents with this. Mom, Dad, the whole town? They explained to me the concept of the white lie, aka the little white lie, aka the tiny fib, the mendacious misdirect that was perfectly acceptable, a commandment non-violation. Though technically bearing false witness, this was a story that you told someone to save someone's feelings. And really, most of the time, it wasn't even a story. It was simply the withholding of some information. Quite the nuance for an 8-year-old to figure out. And I pondered it for a long time. So there's good lies and bad lies. Could a white lie go beige or a little gray? How much color could you add to a white lie before it was a bad lie? Hey, could there be a white part to all of the rest of the commandments? I had a lot to think about. So here's what happens when you lie. One day, the truth shows up and punches you in the gut. I remember the day. I can picture it clearly. It was a nice day after school, bunch of kids milling about before we went home, and Kaz got into some shoving with an older kid. I don't know what the original disagreement was about, but before you knew it, the two of them were on the ground wrestling it out. Eventually, a couple of bigger guys broke it up, but that didn't stop them from chirping at each other. You're an idiot. No, you are. Until the other kid finally snapped and said, oh yeah? Well, you're adopted. Kaz's comeback was, well, yeah, you're adopted. To which the kid said, no, you really are adopted. The whole town knows. Go home and ask your mother. Kaz looked around at all of us. We just looked away or stared at the ground. And at that moment, he knew. And he knew that we all knew. I glanced up long enough to see the look on Kaz's face and his eyes welling up. And then suddenly he just turned and ran home. I picked up all of Kaz's books, and I went home too. I didn't tell my parents about this, but after dinner, they told me. Word had gone around town. Kaz's parents had phoned the other kid's parents, and they had it out, whatever that meant. The big kid was grounded, perhaps also 40 lashes in the town square for disobeying the bylaw. Don't tell Kaz he's adopted. How does a whole society just kind of agree to live a lie? Well, I'm sure we both right now could cite many other examples. I took Kaz's school books over to his house, but I didn't see him. His mother thanked me and told me to call again on the weekend. After that, we played together occasionally, but we never spoke of it. Our friendship waned a bit. We reunited a bit in high school when it was discovered that I too could run pretty fast and also rarely dropped a football. And shortly after that, we moved away. Fast forward a few decades, and I'm recalling the Kaz incident while visiting my mother. She says, he became a barber and also moved to the city. His shop is just 10 minutes away. I jumped in the car and went there immediately, wondering if I'd recognize him or if he'd even remember me. When I walked into the shop, the little bell above the door had barely stopped ringing when the barber looked over at me and said, well, if it isn't for doorknob. That was the first time we talked about those days, and of that one afternoon in particular. Kaz told me about his parents trying to explain why they were just trying to keep the secret a little while longer, and neither of us could figure out how the whole town found out. We both agreed that those traumatic events of childhood become a little less so year after year, and that upon reflection, growing up in our little town was pretty good. It was. Kaz never did find out who his real parents were, nor did he really try. But he did find out that he was Jewish. and as a grown-up really enjoyed pursuing that heritage and faith. And then, he gave me a really good haircut.
I Was 8 is a weekly series written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedoruk. A new episode every Thursday. Share your stories with Larry, or if you like, share Larry's stories with a friend. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Larry Fedoruk, that's Fedoruk, can be reached at larryfedoruk37@gmail.com.